Welcome to You Brew Kombucha. These are some tips on how to fix too sweet or too sour kombucha. So I get a lot of questions from homebrewers who are curious about what to do if their kombucha is too sweet or too sour. So I'll split this into a bunch of recommendations for the two phases of kombucha. So firstly, for the first fermentation phase. So if you have just fermented a batch of kombucha and you haven't flavored it yet and you've tasted it and it's too sweet, that likely means that you just need to keep fermenting it longer. So in that case, just leave it alone, check it after a few days, then taste it at that point to see if the sweet and sour levels are right for you. I have a whole other video on how to tell if your brew is done and ready to bottle, so if you haven't checked that out yet, go ahead and take a look. Now, if on the flip side, you taste your first fermented batch of kombucha and it's too sour. Maybe you forgot about it, or it's just hot where you're brewing your brewing vessel and it just fermented too quickly and now it's a little too acidic. You have a couple options if you're at that point. You can either dilute it with some sweet tea to kind of temper the acidic levels, and then you can go ahead and bottle that slightly diluted acidic kombucha with some fruit and herb flavorings and just go from there and proceed to the second fermentation phase at that point. Or if it's not that acidic and you feel like you can kind of temper it with some sweet fruit juice or fruit puree, then you don't need to add any diluted sweet tea to it at that point. You can just try to balance out the flavors by adding some fruit juice and then bottling it at that point. So it's a pretty forgiving process. It's really hard because this is a natural living thing. It's hard to get consistent sweetness levels, even if you do the same thing every single time to your brew. So as you're tasting it, you're just gonna need to figure out what your taste preferences are and then just accommodate slightly after the fact. Letting your kombucha ferment too long isn't a bad thing. The longer it acidifies, actually, the more resilient to harmful bacteria it becomes. The only bad thing that'll happen at that point is that it becomes too sour or too acidic to drink. But at that point, you can use it as starter tea to make a really good batch of kombucha for your next batch, or you can just dilute it, like I said, or mix other fruit flavorings with it and bottle it to drink it in order to still have that kombucha be usable. It definitely does not need to go to waste. Now, if your second fermented kombucha doesn't taste quite right to you, say you've bottled it and you've added flavorings and it's chilling in your fridge and you open up a bottle and it tastes too sour or too sweet, then at that point it's finished kombucha. It's safe to drink. If it's too sweet, what you can do is just bring that batch back out to room temperature and let it continue to ferment for a few more days, because the more you let it ferment in the bottle, the more sugar gets eaten away by the yeast and bacteria that's present in that brew. So the longer you let it ferment, the more acidic it'll get and the more sugar will be taken away from it. So if it's too sweet, you can always just let it ferment longer. If the carbonation is already perfect, then you can just pop the bottle lids just a tad to release that excess pressure so that it doesn't build up and get overcarbonated as you're fermenting it at room temperature. If it's too sour at that point, then you can use it in marinades as a vinegar dressing, or you can just dilute it at that point with sweet tea or other fruit juices as well. It actually makes for a really fantastic mixer in cocktails as well. So whether it's too sweet or too sour at the first fermentation stage or the second fermentation stage, there's definitely no need to throw out your kombucha or let it go to waste. You can just find creative ways to repurpose it so that it doesn't have to go to waste. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or recommendations, be sure to comment down below, and you can always find more resources at youbrewkombucha.com. Happy brewing!